What's up, everyone? We are here to teach you how to perform the gymnastics style kipping pull-up. Now, before we talk about the kipping pull-up, let's make sure that we understand the application of the kipping pull-up, especially when it compares to the strict pull-up, because both are extremely valuable. Strict pull-up is excellent for strength development and a more kind of strength bias type movement. The kipping pull-up affords us the ability to do more repetitions and use the pull-up in a conditioning sort of setting. Because we allow athletes to use the hips to assist with the pull and the pull-up itself, we can have athletes do more repetitions than they might otherwise do with just a strict pull-up. It is not a replacement for the strict pull-up. It is just a different tool that we have in our toolkit. For athletes who are experienced performing lots of kipping pull-ups, we can develop a tremendous amount of stamina and strength in our forearms and improve more higher level advanced gymnastics pulling movements like a butterfly pull-up, a muscle up, those sorts of things. Without further ado, the kipping pull-up. We're gonna start actually off the pull-up bar. Kyle's gonna be our demo here. And we're gonna just start with two very fundamental positions that are foundational to most gymnastics movements. That's the hollow and arch position. So Kyle's just gonna start on the ground. And for your less experienced, if you're an athlete or a coach, what we're looking for here is Kyle can just start in kind of a dead bug position. And what's really important is that his low back stays on the ground. He's not going to allow his rib cage to flare up. And then he can straighten his legs slowly. If he's good there with the heels, a foot or so off the ground, he can then lean the arms back overhead. And I actually want him to lift his shoulder blades off the ground. And there's no space underneath his low back. And that's a really sound hollow position. You can relax, Kyle. So that's position one. That's super important for our kipping pull-up here. Position two is the arch position, and it's the exact opposite face down. So from this position, you're gonna have Kyle bring his feet and knees together. That's an important point. And when I say lift, lift, he's just gonna think about lifting his thighs and his chest off the ground as much as he can while he's squeezing his butt. You can relax, Kyle, and stand on up. Okay, so drilling that hollow and arch position is really important because the next step as we get up onto the pull-up bar is going to be putting that into practice. So before we actually start swinging on the bar, let's talk about the grip a little bit. We want, ideally, the whole hand with those knuckles to be on top of the pull-up bar with the thumb wrapped around. So if Kyle hops up and demonstrates this and his hands are about shoulder width, slightly wider, that's great. When he's got his whole hand on top of the bar like this, he creates much more stability and strength in his stability in the shoulder joint. You can relax, Kyle, and strength that connects all the way down from the forearm through the inner arm and into the lat, which is ultimately what we're after. If Kyle hangs on with just his fingertips or he puts his thumb on top of the bar, we lose stability and we lose strength in that position. So we want that whole firm grip on the bar. Once Kyle's up here, we're going to start asking him to go back and forth between the hollow and the arch position. The key here, though, is that movement gets driven at the shoulder. So he is going to use the shoulder joint to push and pull, close and open the shoulder, and you can see we're going from that hollow to arch, hollow to arch, hollow to arch. And if I said, Kyle, stop, the fact that he is totally still, you can relax. The fact that he's totally still and under control means that he was kipping rather than swinging like a pendulum back and forth. And we want to differentiate the two. We want a kipping motion. That's what's going to help us get our chin up over the bar in a later step. Okay, so once we've demonstrated that Kyle can get in the hollow and arch position on the ground, we then have a firm grip on the pull-up bar, and then we can initiate the kip hanging. We can then start to kind of introduce movements that are specific to the pull-up. And what I'm going to have him do next is a little baby kipping knee raise. So if you do CrossFit, you know that a kipping knee raise, we typically want to bring the knees up nice and high to the chest. For this, I'm just going to have him bend his knees slightly, and I can even give him a target to hit here. So when he goes through those kips, you can see he's barely getting his knees to about waist height, and that's perfectly fine. That's really all we need. Make sure we still want to use that upper body, to push. Good. Go ahead and relax. Still pushing behind the bar, lifting the knees a little bit. Now, before we add the hips, we want to think about the position that Kyle was just in with those knees bent, and he's going to get on the ground now, as we're going to talk about how to incorporate the hips. he's going to lay back into kind of a pseudo hollow position, but with his knees bent. And he can even put his arms overhead to simulate holding onto that pull-up bar. And this is that same position that he was just in on the pull-up bar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cue him to throw his hips up towards the sky without slamming his heels down as hard as we can. Go! Okay? So you can see that his hips come up first and then his heels hit the ground. Go! Okay? Rather than, go ahead and do one where you slam your heels down and then hips. Go. Okay, one more time. Go. Bad one. Okay, so we can see the heels smashing the ground and the hips coming up at the same time. That's not it. Instead, we want the hips up and then the feet just like that. Okay? So Kyle has now demonstrated that he can do that. We want to try to do that on the pull-up bar. And for some athletes, it might not be possible to get a full pull-up just yet. So we can just start with a kip swing plus a little bit of a hip pop, okay? Kyle's not even gonna worry about the pull just yet. Gets a kip, but you can see he pops that hip. Yep, right idea. Can you link a couple together? Yeah, there we go. He doesn't need to pull just yet. And relax, good. Okay, so we're looking for that hip pop because ultimately the hip pop happens first and then that pulling of the chin over the bar. So I'll have Kyle now. Kyle now has done all of the steps necessary to get a kipping pull-up. So I'm just gonna let's work through 2 of them, Kyle. Okay? So we'll notice those hips pop and then the pull occurs. Okay? So if we've got all that, the next step is talking about linking reps together. And what you'll notice, I'll have Kyle, he's gonna perform a kipping pull-up, but I'm gonna have him pause with his chin over the bar. And what I want you to do is pay attention to how much of Kyle is behind the bar and how much of Kyle is in front of the bar, okay? So Kyle hops up, chin over the bar and pause, and you'll notice his feet are in front because half of Kyle, you can relax Kyle, it's a long time to hold that, about half of Kyle's body mass is behind the bar. The fact that his feet are in front allow him to be balanced where his chin can be held over the bar in a static position. And again, that's a demonstration of control because in order to link the next rep, we need to be able to push ourselves away and down from that pull-up bar. So now again, let's pay attention to Kyle as he links together 3 reps. His chin's over the bar. He's got about half of himself in front of and half behind the bar. And then he is physically pushing away from the pull-up bar at the top. Now, let's say you've got athletes who are either newer or maybe just struggling with the coordination of hips and then pull, the chin's over the bar, and then I need to push away. It's just a lot of going on. What we can do is use a slightly shorter bar and a box. And we want to set the box height so that when Kyle's standing on the box, his chin is about over the bar. It doesn't have to be, it can be below the bar, but Kyle's standing on top of the box here and he's effectively at the top of his pull-up. So again, we want maybe a foot in front Kyle here. So we want kind of half of Kyle in front of the bar and half of him behind. And from here, we just have this supporting leg now, so there's no kind of demand in the upper body or the hips. From here, Kyle can push himself away and kind of come down and through. This is now that arch position, and then he comes back up. And you can see he can do this as slowly as he needs to, just using that working leg to just kind of get the motion, get the coordination aspect down. And then if an athlete can demonstrate that, then we can go back to the unassisted version of the kipping pull-up, okay? So there you have it. Remember, the kipping pull-up has its place in a strength and conditioning program. We want athletes to have the requisite strength to be able to do this movement safely. There's a lot of momentum and torque that goes through the shoulder. So if you're not able to perform strict unassisted pull-ups, that is a better place to start than the kipping pull-up. But if we have that strength, then we can use the kipping pull-up as a tool for either conditioning or further upper body strength development.